Blog Talk Radio.
Live from Washington, D.C., it's Quintessential Listening, Poetry Online Radio. QLPOR, as it's widely known, features a bevy of poets, spoken word artists, and live poetry readings with best-selling authors. Your host is Dr. Michael Anthony Ingram.
Good evening, everyone. My special guest is poet and author Megan Wildhood. Megan is a writer, an editor, and a writing coach who, through many outlets, helps her readers feel seen. She has published a poetry chapbook, Long Division, Quintessential Press, 2017, and now a poetry collection, Bowed as if laden with snow, Cornerstone Press, this month, May 2023. Again, it's available now. And Megan, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me, Dr. Ingram. I'm so excited to be here.
All right. I'm glad you're with me, too. Let's begin this poetic journey, okay?
All right.
All right. Megan, based on what you know about the world and poetry, what is poetry to you?
Oh, that's such a good question. I think poetry for me is my first language, and poetry, the way that I write it and the way that I like to read it is that it gives brief but clear glimpses into whatever world the author is inviting the reader into. So it's imagery in words, and it is more of an invitational kind of relational picture that the author, the writer of the poem, and the reader of the poem kind of create together.
Tell me what it means to you from your heart.
It is, I would say it's my mother tongue. I never learned to write poetry. I just kind of always did it. And I was writing poetry before I knew that I was writing poetry. And I wouldn't say that it's always how I think, but when I want to create intimacy with something or someone, that poetry is the vehicle by which I do that.
You know, usually I ask the following question, why is it important? And I'll still ask that. But I'd like to know, you talked about poetry being the first language, your mother tongue, creating intimacy, poetry is involved. So do you live your life like it's a poem?
That is something I strive to do.
Really? All right.
It's something I aspire to. I also have this kind of very structural, rigid side of me that is very literal, that sometimes makes language brittle, and I think that sometimes that's necessary when you're trying to communicate, instructions, or when you need to be extremely clear and there's only one meaning for things. But as I am trying to relax around that, I find that it actually is poetry that I turn to kind of do that. And that's one of the reasons it's important for me, is that it does tend to relax some of that structured rigidity around, language, but also just kind of how I see the world. So I have these dual sides, and I'm trying to bridge that. And I think poetry can be one way I do that.
All right, very nice. So my question again, in terms of why it's important, you just shared in terms of why it resonates with you. So with the general populace, why do we do what we do as poets? What makes that important?
Yeah, it's such a good question, especially in a culture that doesn't really seem to value poetry or really the arts in general, although I do think that's changing. I think why we do what we do as poets, given that now that I've talked to several poets, some of my press mates at Cornerstone Press, and some of the poets in the writers group that I'm in and have been in for 3 years, we do it because the world is beautiful and we want to witness to that. We want to bear witness to all that is beautiful in the world, even as it is also heartbreaking.
Oh, wow. Let's go back to it being your first language, your mother tongue. I've never heard that before in my 5 years of being on the air. Now, this is the 6th year. I've never heard anyone say that, and that fascinates me. I'd like to know more.
Sure. Thank you. I think that might surprise a lot of people who know me in real life. But also, I think when I first started writing, which was probably first grade, even kindergarten, I remember my first grade teacher, she was circling words in some of my little writing assignments and was just saying, like, wow, this really stands out. Wow, this is really poetic. What an interesting word choice. And I just was like, this is just what's coming naturally to me. I never learned how to write poetically. It was just, that's what showed up. And I can feel the difference because I had to teach myself how to write fiction and how to write nonfiction, so prose. And I think the feedback I've gotten from the book, people who have read the book, who have known me in a capacity where I'm writing prose. I do that for, I do, that's part of my job. They say, wow, it is so, it's like reading the real you when I'm reading your poems. It's like just this window opens up. Whereas with prose, it's, and people who know me will probably, who've read my writing will attest to this, it is how I think, but it's a little bit harder to follow, and it has to be kind of manicured and massaged and edited a lot more. Whereas poetry, not that I don't edit my poetry, but it comes, sometimes I feel poems just crawl down my arm, and that is something I've experienced my entire life. I've never learned how to write poetry. It's just kind of something that's been there.
Well, does it crawl down your arm or crawl up your arm, inside of you, into your head? I mean, I'm just asking.
Oh, that is all. Yes, it's probably both. I didn't think about that. Because if it crawls down your arm, then it's crawling off of you. But it crawls up your arm, then it's crawling into your body and your system. Yes, that is also true. When I read other people's poems, and that is very true.
You know, you've already answered some questions, because my next question would have been, and it's going to be, please share with me an early experience where you learned that poetic language had power. Yes, I think when it's going back to the writing assignments in first grade. Yes. I wasn't trying to find pretty words. I wasn't trying to impress anyone. I was really just searching out, there's a perfect word that goes here, and to make the story work, I have to find that word. And those would often be the words that my teacher would circle and say, wow, this really jumps out. This is very vivid. This is really showing me a picture. I'm really seeing what you're writing. And I was like, wow, words can create pictures. That's fascinating. So, and it never occurred to me until then that I can make pictures in other people's minds with words. Wow. I like the way you think. The way you talk. You've already got me wrapped up. I'm enjoying myself already. We've only been there 9 minutes. All right. What are some of the predominant themes that you write about? I think one of the main things that I write about it wasn't really a choice, it just kind of kept showing up, is love, and by extension, grief. Okay. And because I don't think that I have had an experience of love that is void of grief. And that's kind of how I know that I love something or someone, is that there's either anticipatory grief or there's like real and present grief. And I write what I write. I think I'm writing about a tree or about my cat or this, beautiful sunset that I saw. But it always turns into
this experience of love. And I think the reason love and grief are connected is because everything is temporary in the world, and yet there is something in each of us that knows that that isn't how it was made to be.
Wow. We'll talk more about that as we continue this journey. But I'd like to know, all great writers have great writing influences. Who are some of yours, and what makes them great in your eyes, Megan?
Yes. So one of the great writers that I continue to draw inspiration from, even about 50 years after his death, is C.S. Lewis. He was not a poet, but his writing, he wrote fiction and nonfiction, and all of his writings are just like latent. There's metaphor just latent within every, in my opinion, every sentence. Whether he's telling a sci-fi trilogy story, whether he's talking to England in World War II about how the Christian faith applies in that setting, and then that was turned into a book called Mere Christianity, which is one of the only books that I've read multiple times. And just it's more the depth that he takes readers to with even the simplest of constructions, the simplest of words, but they're so well chosen, so sharp, and so exactly the right word at that particular time. And I feel like I came into the world that way, and then I want to be even more like that. He seems to really respect what words mean. And that's something that when I was a child, I read the dictionary and I thought it was a book about everything. And it seems like C.S. Lewis may have also read the dictionary, because he seems to know exactly the word in every situation. So he's one of my someone who continues to speak to me from beyond the grave, as it were. I think one of the other another inspiration that I have is actually the Psalms, the Psalter in the Bible. It's some of the most beautiful poetry and some of the most raw poetry that I have read. And I love that it's Holy Scripture as well, because it shows the kind of relationship that the God of the Christian Bible wants to have with his people. And I just have not found a better model for the kind of intimacy that poetry can invite two people into. And so not that I don't aspire to write Holy Scripture, obviously, but it's just that level of intimacy with the reader and between the reader and the speaker and the writer is something that just strikes me every time I read a psalm out of Scripture.
Please share a poem.
Sure. So speaking of love, this is from my now available collection, Bodas Laden with Snow. It's called Love in the Injustice Age. Love in the injustice age is when you know someone so well you could be her scream. Tia and I, we have caught a glimpse of our extinction. We are hunting it down. We build peace with justice, Tia and I. She cracks jokes like belts, and I dig like an insult, and the scant trees seize in the wind. We make this ditch with pickaxes, and fear, and sick hope, and just us. We are trying to prevent wasteland, place where no mystery can live, at least somewhere. And so we have to dig. Past dirt, through the fat bones of old trees, below water tables, screaming with life. Barrier. But we must find what everyone will believe is worth saving. Tia shares personal opinions about love and cancer. I press her to keep digging with me. We must find something gold for humanity, and we must find it here. We do stop for snacks, for sleep, to watch dark and light plunder the growing thunderheads. Birds fly off in the tsunamic sea that is hooked like a rubber band around God's thumb. Do you hear that sound? Tia asks, leaning her shovel into juicy soil. Nothing from the birds, but the moon, small but good shepherd, yelps against our never-dulled blades. Frogs, the ones we haven't dissected in our hurry, waddle crawl across sticky leaves we've tossed aside. Blades buzz in the sepia breeze. Tia gets to the ground. Wrists, elbows, triceps, ear. Here. She handprints the pulped dirt. Here. I see the scream, blue holes in my vision, before I feel it gash my throat. Tia buries her face in the slit shoulder of earth. It is painful to believe that every rock is sacred, because nothing survives love. Thank you.
Wow. What is the purpose of that particular poem?
Yes.
What are you attempting to convey?
Yes. The thing I think that I actually constructed this poem around the last line, which is just 3 words. Nothing survives love.
Okay.
And what I'm hoping to convey in more of an image form is the idea that there are these 2 people, the speaker and Tia, that are trying to find beauty. It's like maybe a post-apocalyptic world, and they're trying to find something that will inspire people to save the world, because what happens with love, I think, in my experience and in my understanding of it, is that if done well, love actually purifies, consumes, even in some ways destroys what was there before to make it into the image of what it should be. And so that's nothing survives. That's what that means. Nothing survives love. And so it's more of a hope too, that we could be people who love that fiercely.
In terms of poetic devices, which devices do you employ most often?
Oh, that's a great question. I think I don't usually use form, although I will say that one form that has very much caught my attention and that I'm a little bit obsessed with appropriately would be the pantoum. It's a poem for the anxious, I would say.
All right.
The one that kind of helps untangle the welter of ruminating thoughts that people who experience anxiety often have, and that's a very repetitive type of form that I found helps kind of get some of that untangled. So I think the pantoum. I also think repetition, and then I think so repetition just in terms of words and images. Another thing that I didn't really consciously realize I was doing, but then have employed since then, is like the double or triple meanings of words and phrases. That, like, even the title of this entire collection, "Boat as if Laden with Snow," that's a line from one of the poems, and rather than the title of a poem itself. And I dedicated this book to my late grandparents, whose last name was Snow. But I actually didn't do that on purpose. So I feel like that kind of stuff shows up in my writing a lot. It's not really intentional.
Okay. You published the poetry chapbook, Long Division, and now this collection, Bowed as If Laden with Snow. I want to focus on that for a period of time. What inspired it? Was it your grandparents?
So they inspired a number of poems in this collection, and it was actually I didn't realize I was writing a collection. These poems were written, some as long ago as 2008, when my grandfather died in 2008. And so I was writing these poems, and I did not realize that it was a collection until I noticed, I keep returning to the theme of gardening. My grandfather was a gardener. I keep returning to the theme of like the environment and how humans are interacting with the earth, or I am wanting to write about a specific environmental incident like the forest fires that really impacted Seattle in 2017 with all the smoke that I had not seen in Seattle but grew up with in my childhood in Colorado. And so I was like, there are a lot of themes here, the environment, my grandparents, and I feel like there was a lot of connection between those two because a lot of memories I have from I grew up seeing my grandparents every week, sometimes more, and a lot of those were outside. We were playing in their huge backyard. We were walking to, we called it Nana's pool, which was the pool in her neighborhood. We were doing something outside, even when it was like maybe about to snow or when there were thunderclouds forming. Colorado has somewhat erratic weather. And so I just was like, there's a connection here. And by the time I realized that, I had written almost all these poems. So it was, again, sort of an unconscious inspiration for these poems. And so there were just a few that I wrote to kind of fill in the collection as a collection once I realized that's what I've been doing for the last 13 years.
Okay. I'd like to know more about the title. It's very interesting. Bowed as if laden with snow. I mean, such a beautiful line. Tell me more about this title. What does it mean? What does it mean? That's what I really want to know. What does it mean?
Thank you. Yeah. This line came, usually when a collection is put together, the title of the collection is the title of one of the poems, but that's in the collection. But I didn't feel like any of the titles of any of my poems in this collection actually fit. And so I was trying a few, and it just, none of them really seemed to work. And I thought, well, I could, settle for one or two and do it, because it really sets the tone of the collection. And so as I was revising the poem that's called I Wish Human Destruction Was Like, the line, "Bowed as if laden with snow," jumped out. And that line was not originally in the first draft of this poem. And as I was revising this poem, it jumped out, and I thought, this is the title of the collection. And it's actually just a clause in one of the lines of this poem. And what's kind of ironic about this title is I actually don't really like snow that much. I don't like shoveling it. I don't like being cold. You'd think being from Colorado, I would have gotten used to that, but I really just not so much. I love heat, and I like dry heat, but I don't particularly like snow. But my grandparents' last name is Snow, so technically I'm a snowflake. So there's that. And I thought, well, this line jumped out. It's the title. This is the title, and I had to kind of go, okay, why does this work as the title? And I think this is sort of retroactive thinking, like, okay, this is why this makes sense. Initially, it was just a feeling that this is the title, but what I think, at least what it means to me, is that so snow has great weight, especially in Colorado. It snaps tree branches, and then that knocks the power out, and then that's when we have snow days. And so I was always more focused on, as a child, on the weight of snow rather than on its beauty or on like what you can do in it. Like, can you build a snowman? Can you go skiing? And I was more like, how bowed is that branch? Is it going to break? And is it going to knock the power out? Kind of, fingers crossed, because I wanted a snow day, but also a little bit like, oh, what are we going to do without power? And so I was thinking, okay, this jumped out at me probably because that's kind of how I pay attention to a lot of things in life is what is their weight? What is and what is causing their weight? So it's not necessarily snow that's weighing everything down, and being weighed down is not necessarily was a bad thing either. There's sometimes, like I remember some Christmases where it would snow, and the boughs it would make in the huge, we had a blue spruce tree in our yard when I was growing up, were beautiful. that I did think that was beautiful, mostly because I didn't have to shovel it, but because it's on the trees. But I think it's just that's why it leapt out at me was, that's explaining me to myself. Like, I do look for weightiness and what is causing the weightiness in life.
Now, would you be willing to share a poem that contains the line?
Yes,
Right,
I would. Okay, this is the poem. I wish human destruction was like. I wish human destruction was like the exuberantly rotting nurse logs all along the trail of the last hike I took my antsy rescue dogs on before the season closed. I left my little girls with their fevers at their father's. I packed for what I knew. I skirt a face-down river, flail as the marionettist of my pack, dread that I wasn't born 100 years ago, farther from the end of the world. I listen for the names of things. The cold sizzles. Branches, bowed as if laden with snow, weaken with their own growing weight. How do I teach my girls about snow? Which dark isn't scary? What to do with wishes and love? That the real fairy tale is when no one needs saving. I excel at walks on the beach. We are in a woods. We are in a woods because humans aren't working. Human relationships aren't working. I needed to be loved by someone who has failed. That's not yet birds, gales, soil. I hit dirt with my knees. My dogs look crazy at me. Cups of earth in my hands, dirt on my dogs' tongues. I hold their faces, kiss them. Sorry, sorry. I'm so sorry. Thank you.
Wow. I don't know what to say. And that's not like me.
Yeah. Oh.
You talked about love and grief. I'm going to say the yin and yang of love and grief. And I'm wondering, does it hurt you to write poetry? If not, why not?
Oh, that's a really good question. I think that I would say for the most part, most times that it does, but it's the kind of hurt that indicates healing, which is actually not always true about when I write prose. But with poetry, I feel like it's, okay, we're maybe exposing a wound here. We're maybe digging in some stuff that is kind of raw, hasn't really been processed. And so kind of like when you're washing a wound with salt water, it does not feel good. And there's pain, stinging. You just kind of want it to be over, but that's a process that you have to go through if you want it to be healed without infection. And so I actually hadn't thought about it that way until you asked that question. I think that actually is a lot of times what I'm doing when I'm writing a poem as opposed to writing like a story or an article. Okay.
Please share another poem.
Okay. So I am going to share... since I mentioned this one, I'll share this one. This is one that I wrote into early 2009, dedicated to my grandfather after he died in December of 2008. But I am still connected to you. The water I walk over commuting from my day job cradles the moon, the face of a man whose aging will never stop. Slender rain pinpricks his foamy cheeks and rounded jowls, shatters as I walk through it into infinitesimal pools on the shabby sidewalk all the way to home. It's swishing and tangling in branches of the drama queen weeping willow. I, too, want to cry and never stop. I asked my dad to plant next to the greedy lilac I imported to my own garden from Pops. Is there a better way to honor passing 83 years on knees beside pews, among bees and peat and painted petunias, all to lay fallow and eventually be remembered by no one in a listing world that never stops? I could have paused in my white of orbit, tended the lilac with him while it was still his, taken my here and there to his here and now. I only have these holes, a waft of budding, a dent of rainfall. Thank you.
You know, Megan, it's not only the way you craft words, it's also the way that you speak. Now, is there an audio version of this book available, or is it coming down the pipeline or something?
People have actually asked that question, and I would definitely be willing to do that. I am going to ask the press if that's a thing that either they would want to do or something that I could potentially do. But yes, that's actually come up enough times that I am like, okay, this is probably something that needs to be done.
You know, on this program, I listen to a lot of people, and I really like the way the words flow from you. And what I want to know is, what is the relationship between your speaking voice and written voice?
Oh, yes. So when I've done workshops with people interested in learning how to write, one thing I always say is that most people should not write like they talk.
Tell me. Wow. I like that. Yeah. Tell me.
There's definitely exceptions to that. But I think David Foster Wallace is actually an exception to that. But because he did write. He wrote like he talked. And it was, to me, I found it incredibly fascinating, as controversial as a figure as he was, or still is. But most people shouldn't write like they talk, and the reason is because nobody speaks grammatically correctly, and that's hard to read, but it's not hard to hear. And it also, people, well, like I just did, will change their thought mid-sentence. They'll do a lot of fillers. Their thoughts are not really super organized. So when you're reading a piece of prose, that is not usually how somebody talks. It's been edited. It's been probably read by multiple people. It's been changed so that it's easier to read. The relationship between, I would say there's multiple relationships. The relationship between my prose and my written voice is probably too close. I probably need to do a little more editing. And I actually have some friends who are helping me with that, because I think in paragraph-long sentences that all have footnotes, and that is difficult to read. But my speaking voice and my poetic voice, I think, when I'm facing towards that ideal that I mentioned earlier about living my life as a poem, I think they're close in a good way. But I also I found, as I've done more readings, I did a reading workshop. I used to read way too fast, and people could not catch the images. They couldn't process the poems, and they told me to slow down. And the reason they said that is because they actually wanted to hear the poem, and they wanted to see the poem. And I didn't know that. I just wanted to get it over with because I was shy and scared. So I took this workshop about, how to read your poems. And I do think I'm a little more conversational than others, but there is an effort that I try to get inside the poem rather than inside like my head, which has been, at work all day or in the garden or something that's, in a totally different vein than poetry, although gardening and poetry are not actually that different. But So I am doing a what is the mood of this poem today kind of exercise when I'm reading. I've read that poem before, and I actually read it very differently. So the relationship, I would say, is based on what being to bring out of the poem in that particular moment.
Okay, all right. So with that piece tonight, reading of it, what were you hoping to bring out of it that the listeners, and including me, would hear?
Yeah, so in the poem about my grandfather and his garden, tonight I was really feeling the sadness of the eventually to be remembered by no one in a listing world that never stops.
Yes.
When I wrote that, in 2008, I was 22. So, and that's the age I was when he died. So I kind of thought, well, oh yeah, we'll always remember him. But even though that's true for us, always is a very short time for a human being. Because life is the longest thing we know, but it's actually pretty short. 83 years is really nothing in the cosmic time scale. So I was really like that. As I'm getting older, I'm really understanding this whole thing that grown-ups said around me as a kid, like, wow, time is really flying. How is it already Christmas again? How is it already Easter again? That sort of thing. And so that is something I've been trying to really process and metabolize as I'm like, oh yeah, that I really am feeling that now in a way that I was not as a kid, even all the way through my 20s.
Understandable. I was also very intrigued by the cover of your book. Tell me more about its creation.
Oh, okay. So this, yes, this was designed by the press. What was interesting is because I'm not very artistic visually, but and that's okay. That's okay with me. But the thing that I loved about this cover is when this was presented to me, I had not told the press that aspens are my favorite tree and that they remind me. So that's something I don't know that people who are not from Colorado really know about Colorado is like the mountains are like covered in aspen trees. And so even more than snow or sun, Colorado is the sunniest state in the country, or like very dry weather, whether it's hot or cold, being elevated. More than all of that, the thing that really strikes me as very Colorado is the aspen trees. And I just hadn't told anybody that. It's just something I remember from my childhood, like in the fall, the aspen turn yellow, then orange, then red, and it looks like sun and then fire. And it's just this brilliant, I've never experienced anything like that, any other place I've been. But it was such a wonderful, I don't know that I believe in coincidences quite like this, but that this, because I don't like snow, so I didn't really want there to be a lot of snow, but there's this suggestion of snow, which I love. And because that's actually, the title is Bowed as If, Laden with Snow, but the aspen trees are really my favorite part because they remind me so much of my childhood. And there's a lot of my childhood, not all of the poems that say I are actually me, it's the speaker. But there's a lot of poems in here that are from my childhood. And so when the aspens came up, I thought, wow, this is the symbol. If I had to pick a symbol of my childhood, it would probably be, at least the outdoorsy part of it would probably be aspen trees.
Okay, so it's not bowed, bold, right?
People have said it either way. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I was like, she's been really nice. She never corrected me. Because I was like, that's okay. Well, what does bold mean? But if it's bowed, I know what that means. But bold, I've never heard that before.
Yes.
I'm from the
that's
deep
kind
south,
of one of the...
so...
Yes, that goes back to the device question that you asked earlier.
Yes.
Where I use words, and it wasn't always intentional. I am more aware of it now, where it's a double, either a double meaning or like bowed, those kind of words where it's actually both. It could be both. It could be either. And I try to do that because I think that while I very much respect that words have their particular meaning, and
Yes.
One word cannot mean everything. It does have a circumspect meaning to it. Otherwise, you'd use a different word. But there are ways. English is a great language for this. It's so flexible, and you can say so much with one word, with a few words. And so I try to play with, in my poetry, how few words can I use to make the point that I want to make.
Okay.
And so that's kind of where so bowed is that's the one that makes the most sense, because it's the one, where it's like the weightiness of everything that I focus on. And then bowed, for me, this is the sort of like Emily Dickinson's slant kind of meaning, where I think that, so I don't particularly think snow beautiful, because when I think of snow, I think of it snowed and then it's on the roads and the cars are driven by, so it's like turning gray and black, and it's just kind of really, I don't know, sort of gross looking, or slush is not that fun. But I have had images, I've had experiences where I felt like I was in a Christmas card. Like one time I was in Ohio for Christmas, and it just snowed and there were cardinals everywhere, and first time I'd seen a cardinal in the wild. And I was like, okay, I can see how snow is beautiful. But I would only want enough of it like a bow on a present.
Oh, I see.
And
I see.
So it's like there's this touch of, and this is how, people can love snow, that's totally fine, but I think everybody has their thing where like most people like this thing and you don't really like it, but you're like, okay, I guess I can kind of see how this might be all right, but only in small doses. And so for that Christmas, it just snowed that one day when I was in Ohio, and it was like, this was a nice little bow on that Christmas day.
Okay. I started to wonder, Megan, whether you were metaphorically allergic to snow. You've not said very many nice things about it. So,
which is ironic, yes. What redeems it for me is that it's my grandparents' last name, and they're the ones. Right. My dad's parents died when I was young, unfortunately, so I never really knew them. But I knew my mom's parents until I was an adult, and my last grandparent died in 2019. So really, I've had them most of my life, and so there's this processing of like being grandparentless, which is like I didn't sign up for that. I'm not a fan at all, and but my mom's parents were so constant in my life that it's like, well, okay. Their last name is Snow, and I actually am one of 7 snowflakes. So there's that. At least there's, and it's a little ironic that I really don't like snow, and yet my beloved grandparents' last name is Snow. That's something I feel like God is winking at me about. Like, oh, really, really? Well, you can't escape it. It's literally in your blood.
Megan, please share a poem.
Okay. So I'm going to share, let's see, I'm trying to share ones that I have not typically shared, but I just, there's just this one that I don't know, I don't want to pick favorites because it's like picking favorites among your children, but I do love this one. This one is called The Eighth Plague. The book of Exodus in the Old Testament has it this way. God inflicted 10 calamities on the nation of Egypt to persuade Pharaoh to release God's people from slavery, even though God was preventing Pharaoh from freeing God's people. This sounds like human logic. And the plagues aren't in any sort of discernible order either. They don't strike alphabetically, or by subject matter, or by height, or in order of least bad to worst. Death of the firstborn does seem like the worst to me. I'd have been a goner. But boils, the 6th plague, seem worse than turning water into blood, which God does first. That's just creepy. And the one with the locusts. Did God send a billion bugs from heaven? Or is swarming the kind of thing locusts do? Locusts are usually solitary unless there's a drought followed by rapid vegetation growth. The serotonin release this triggers causes these introverts to get gregarious, breed like mad, and hoard. Sure, this can instigate economic and agricultural damage, but it's been happening for thousands of years wherever locusts live. I sympathize with scripture writers, though. When I'm facing powers far beyond my puny control that are making me miserable, the first thing I do, usually, is hurl a plague of screams at every place I think God is, and especially in every place I think God is not. Thank you.
Wow. I need a second.
I get that a lot.
I'm sure you do. So, Megan, during the selection process, how did you decide which poems to choose to include in the book?
Yes. So at first it was kind of a flail where it was like, oh, I've been writing poems for 13 years. I have a couple hundred, and no, I've never seen a poetry collection that long, so I probably couldn't get away with that. So I started by just picking ones that I actually liked, because that used to be kind of difficult for me. It used to be difficult for me to like my writing. I really had to work through a lot of perfectionism and comparison and imposter syndrome and inferiority complex and all of that. And so I thought, oh, that'll narrow it down to, the number that I need, and narrowed it down too much. So I then thought, okay, if I'm actually intentionally making a collection out of poems I didn't write with a collection in mind, I have to kind of pick a theme. Right. I didn't know that people set out to write collections from the beginning. So this is me I have to learn everything the hard way, I guess. But I thought, okay, of the poems I like that I wrote, what are the themes that come out? And they were nature, love, grief, which are all connected with my grandparents.
Yes.
And so I thought, okay, it's really, the overarching theme is really actually time and my pretty significant issues that I have with time. Like, I sort of disagree with how this whole time thing should go. And so that ended up being the fence, as it were, for like, okay, if you relate in some way to time, you can come in the gate. And if not, then we're going to save you for the next collection.
All right. Okay. Please share with me the titles of 5 poems in the book.
Okay.
Any poems?
Any random ones. Okay, so This one is, This Is What the Storm's All About. Crisis Projects. Ton as in eschaton. We Are Not World Enders. And Glyptodon, which is written in Greek.
Wow. So, Megan, when titling a poem, what should be considered?
So this is interesting. This is a very interesting question. One of the very consistent pieces of feedback that I've gotten from my writers group and from other people who have, been like friends along the way, who have been in, critique relationships with my poems, they've all said something like, this title doesn't immediately relate to the poem for me. So I have to think about how these are connected. And there would be a lot of times where I would kind of do that on purpose, because I wanted to stretch people's thinking about a certain subject.
All right. And
so I think what I consider in titling a poem is first of all, what's the mood that I want to set? And second, how much do I want to stretch the thinking about the subject that I'm going to write about for the reader?
Okay. So what comes first, the poem or the title?
Oh, wow. That's a good question. I would say, and this is sort of an ironic answer, in my first draft, the poem.
Okay.
In my revisions, the title.
We're going to take a very short break, but I got a question for you that I'd like you to answer after the break. Sure. The question is, how does the poem know where to go? Who leads, you or the poem? And we'll be right back. We are back. I'm Michael Anthony Ingram. I'm here with Megan Wildhood. Megan, how does a poem know where to go? Who leads, you or the poem?
Oh, this is such a lovely question. Thank you so much for this. This is going to sound very woo-woo in a way that I'm not usually, and most people who know me in real life are going to be like, what? Where did this come from? I ask the poem if it needs help or if it just wants me to follow, and I usually get an answer.
An answer that you like?
And if I don't, yes. Well, I used to because I had issues with control, which is one of the symptoms of oldest child syndrome.
Yes.
If I got the answer, well, if the poem said to me, okay, I'd like to lead, then I'd be like, but what if you're wrong? And the poem would say, well, how are you going to know if you're following the right way? So there's that. So in that way, I had a little therapy session with the poem a couple times. Yes. But I think that has been sort of a measure of how much control I've been able to let go of over the years. So there actually has been sort of I don't write for therapy. I think it can be used that way. That's not typically how I do it. But this relationship with who decides where the poem goes, me or the poem, then, and it's really been a measure of how well I'm doing at releasing the illusion of control, because we don't actually have a lot of control anyway as teensy humans, but that has been really helpful. And so I would say that if I like the answer, that me liking the answer depends on how well the poem turns out. But I also don't really feel like I get to decide that either.
All right. Please share another piece.
Okay. So this is actually one of the first poems I wrote in this collection. So it was before I knew anything about collections at all or how to do it. And it changed form a lot. This is called This Glass Ledger. Progressive petal, blushed like a clapping hand. Plates, a sun gleam. How does the world hold you? Unrequited lash from calloused palm, closed around a belt. Stones puncturing stream, catching footfalls, sure and not. Careening car spun out in a slosh. Shaky hands ring the scene. ceaseless sunstrike, fragile, frosts the night time between once friends. Chest tights, dusk tips its hat, pigeon spoken between light and dark, full breaths. Thank you.
Wow. You know, accessibility is something that a lot of people talk about. And so what I'd like to know is, how much mental energy should one use or to solve a poem?
Oh, that's a great question. I think it sort of depends, and I'm not trying to duck. I do think it depends on it depends on what the reader wants to get out of reading poetry. When I read poetry, I would like to be invited into something that has some sort of structure or some path or some kind of guideposts. But I would also like to kind of find my own way. So I would like a poem maybe to be a cairn on a hiking trail, and the words to sort of be little flares here and there, guiding me towards what the author thinks is interesting, but also allows me to kind of explore and decide for myself if I think it's interesting. Now, that sometimes takes a lot of mental energy for me, but sometimes the way the poem is written, it's just sort of like, oh, this is sort of like I'm on a lazy river, and the poem is really carrying me along, but it's not telling me what's in the sky. So that's neat. And then sometimes it's like, okay, this is 2,000 feet of elevation in 3/4 of a mile. Put your helmets on. Let's go. And I prefer, there are certain times where I prefer one over the other. I think I've really benefited from both. Sometimes I read prose to escape reality. I don't ever read poetry to escape reality. And I don't write poetry to escape reality.
Wow. You know, poetry has a reputation for being less accessible than prose. Do you agree with that? How do you combat this perception?
Oh, yes. I've heard this perception where people often feel locked out of poems. They feel like they're not accessible. They are like, well, I feel like if you wanted to be understood, why wouldn't you just write a paragraph, or why wouldn't you just write a direct article? And I think that's because of how high school English teaches poetry. I think that if I didn't already love poetry and already love writing, then I probably would be totally turned off, because the way that we teach, I was in AP English when I was in high school, but so I had an amazing teacher. And an amazing group of students. We created anthologies together. But people who I've heard, they struggled in English class because they had to do thematic essays of novels and poems. And I'm like, I've also written novels, and ain't no novelist I know writes a novel in a thematic way. That's not how that happens at all. It's about the character. It's about the person. It's about the story. And I think for poetry, the core, the seed of a poem is the image. And so, and I'm not a visual thinker at all. And so saying that from me is like, I'm not a visual thinker, yet my first language is poetry. So I'm obviously a visual thinker in terms of words. And the way I combat that perception that poetry is less accessible, because I think it can be accurate. Like if you had to read E. Cummings in high school, first of all, I'm sorry. Second, that's not read Robert Frost also, and read like Billy Collins or Maggie Nelson and these kinds of people who they want you to understand. They might want you to work for it a little, because we value what we work for, but the work is rewarding rather than frustrating. And so the way I combat the language that, no, you can't understand poetry, I'm not a poet person, is I write poems that people can see. I try to do that, because I didn't know people thought in pictures, but most of my friends think in pictures. And so when I try to write poems that people can see or visualize based on the words they're reading, I don't think I'm always successful at that. But that's that's because I think the seed of the poem is an image, and so I want people to be able to, if they can see the words, then the words don't get in the way of understanding anymore.
Yes. You stated, and I'm probably paraphrasing now, that you do not use poetry to escape reality. Did you say that?
I did.
All right. Reality. People, based on their different lived experiences, is just different. You know, in this world, Megan, you know this, that there's the good, the bad, the ugly, as well as the indifferent. What I'd like to know from you is, what do you view as being the role of a poet in modern day society?
Yes, I think the role that a poet should have, that I think I strive to take on, is showing people where the beauty is and why the world is worth saving the way it is.
Wow, the way it is. Wow. The way it is worth saving.
Yeah.
Why do you think that?
We've got a lot of mess here, obviously.
Yes.
There's catastrophe after catastrophe.
Yes.
History is just one darn thing after another, as someone said. And obviously I don't mean to say that like we shouldn't make changes, but the way we should make changes should honor what we have, because what we have is also, it's very beautiful. Humans, as messed up as all of us are just stunning creatures. There's no replica of any one of us, and that takes me to my knees sometimes thinking about this. That
all right.
There's no repetition in humanity, and like not even close. And I don't know. I mean, I couldn't do that. When I try to create characters for my novels, I'm like, well, this one's actually really so similar to this other one that no one is going to be able to tell the difference. And this is not what we find. I think change, it's needed in a lot of ways, of course, but it's not going to come from this like, well, let's just burn it all down. Like, no, there is stuff worth saving here. There is like beauty, and beauty is, I think, Abraham Maslow, I think, got it wrong. Beauty and connection and relationship need to be at the bottom of that needs pyramid, just as much as food and water and shelter are.
All right. Megan?
Yes.
All right. There was a long pause, or the connection broke at that particular moment.
Yeah,
so
I think it might have been my phone. Yeah.
I didn't hear it, and I'm sure it was great too. Probably extremely profound. Well, let me ask this question. Do you want Bold as Laden with Snow to? What's the audience? Who are you trying to reach? Do you have a target audience, or is it primarily a broad range of readers?
So I think it's for people who have struggled with the facts and the stories of climate change. There's this. I have some friends who really have wrestled with what they call climate grief, and just watching. There's a lot of destruction that human beings are doing, and there's a lot of good too, which is actually what I tried to write about, that not to paper over some of the things that humans really do need to change in relationship with the world, but that we're actually also we're doing a lot of good. We're bringing back species that were on the brink of extinction. We're greening lands that had previously been considered desertified and dead. We are restoring riverbeds that had previously, just totally died out. We are doing amazing things. So even as the dominant narrative seems to be, humans are destroying the planet. I've even heard people talk about humans as a cancer on the planet. I disagree. I think humans are amazing, and I think we have been tasked with healing the earth for a reason, and there are many ways in which we're doing that. So if I have to pick a narrow audience, it's for people who have or currently are experiencing, the grief about what they are hearing about climate change and maybe the destruction they are witnessing. And for a broader audience, maybe people who they've struggled with poetry. They don't understand. They feel that it's not for them. And I kind of want to say, like, okay, I accept that challenge, and I invite you to experience what I hope, because I wrote some of these poems with those people in mind. That
very nice.
I don't know that poetry is for everyone, but I would love it if you would give it another chance.
Wow. So if you were to give your readers of this particular book advice before they purchased the book, what would it be?
I would say that if you're someone who wants to find beauty in what may be scary or sad or difficult, like the climate change story,
yes,
then I invite you to read Boat is a Sling with Snow, because it's sort of my journey out of that, like climate despair, into, hey, what if we focus on why the world is worth saving and why all the people in it are too?
I know some of my questions may seem repetitive, but they're not repetitive to me, because I just want to know what you know about your book.
I love it. I love it.
That's important. That's important. I want to know what you know.
It totally is.
I want to know why you wrote it.
I love it.
So what do you think you learned about yourself writing this book?
One thing I learned is that I actually can be positive. That when I was in high school, some people nicknamed me Negativity, and that was really terrible. It was hurtful, but it hurt because it was true. And I was like, I don't want to be that person. Like, I don't need to be all Pollyanna and like fake positive. That's not me either. But it doesn't. I personally don't think it helps to point out the negative over and over and over and over and over again. And I was someone who did that. So I learned in writing this that I actually can write in a way about beauty that is genuine, and it's not cliche or borrowed from someone who actually believes beauty is a thing, but I really don't. And that, like, it just wasn't in my self-conception, positive person. And writing this changed that.
All right. You reached my favorite part of the show. I view it as being a mini poetry concert. This is an opportunity for you, Megan, to share 2 or 3 of your works back to back, no interruptions from me. Megan, you're on the stage.
Okay. I am going to share. Let's see, what order should I do this in? Okay. I got it. So this one is called If I Were Time. If I were time, there we go. Okay. If I were time, people would marvel at how much of me had passed without their noticing, how both long and scarce I am, how only I have the balm for some wounds. Only I can change things like minds or hearts, but I myself don't change. Maybe this is why some seek ways to stop or even kill me. You'd think I was the perfect lover, the way some talk about me. They can never have enough. But I'm searching for that one who can enjoy me just as I am. Empty, inert, needing help knowing what I'm made of. This next one is called Mystery Confirmed. By the end of the year my grandmother was born, there were 2 theories about very small things, and both were right. The previous year, there had been none. The thought experiments turned into very small, very precise machines. Think it, it becomes. The very act of observing something. Some things are too long to see. Radio waves, the whole truth, the end of the rainbow of history, even if everything is consciousness. If everything is consciousness, then who is thinking, bombs bring peace, whiteness is better, trees are paper? Observation is transformation. If seeing something changes it, who should step in front of a mirror? Who should watch a murder? Who can be let into a peaceful meadow? And who needs to turn their gaze away, lest we leave but a quiet spot before we know what's going on? And the final one is another one of my favorites, called Remainder. Heaven and earth will pass away. No one knows about that day or hour, not even the angels in heaven, nor the Son, but only the Father. Matthew 24:35-36. The Jewish uprising against the Romans in 70 A.D., the final end-time battle. Coins were minted. The world remained. A French bishop announced the end of the world in 365. The world remained. 3 learned men said, no, the year 500 will be the last because of the dimensions of Noah's Ark. Pope Innocent III, the world will end 666 years after the rise of Islam. After their leader's 1260 prediction failed, the followers of Joachim of Fiore rescheduled the end of the world to 1290, and then again, 1035. The world remained. 1346 to 1351, the Black Plague, end of the world for many. Some people who were alive around 1439 thought the world would end then. Hand-wringing. Now that people no longer had to remember anything, now that everything could be written down, what will become of everything we love? Yes, people feared books would destroy culture. The world filled with tomes and remained. Now imagine a democracy without a free press. A Puritan minister declared the end 3 times, starting in 1697. John Wesley said any time between 1758 and 1836. Rural farmer and Baptist preacher William Miller promised the end in 1844. The world remained, and everyone was disappointed. The Catholic Apostolic Church, founded 1831, couldn't give an exact date for Jesus' return, just that it would be when the last of its founding members died, which was 1901. 1939 turned out to be a good candidate for the end. The world remained. Jim Jones saw a vision of a nuclear holocaust occurring in 1967, which the current administration says you can survive. You can live in remains, they mean. A doctor of natural medicine and founder of a Baha'i sect, Halley's Comet will obliterate Earth in April 1986. The world remained. His friend, a series of disconfirmed prophecies that would lead step by step to the apocalypse. Also, Middle Eastern terrorists would attack New York with nuclear bombs. The world remains. A quatrain by Nostradamus, who survived the plague, says the King of Terror will come from the sky in 1999 and 7 months. Y2K, 2012. Some think 2016, some 2020. Some think the internet will yet destroy everything. The world remains. The world remained. The world remains. Perhaps the world will start to end the moment people no longer do. Until the last hour, the world will remain. Thank you.
What a perfect poem. I think I already know the answer to this question. Do you think you were meant to be a poet?
Yeah, I do, but it took me quite a long time to get there.
Okay. What surprises you most about being a poet?
What surprises me most? I would say that what surprises me most is that when I write, I feel God's pleasure.
Wow. Say that one more time and a little bit louder.
Sure. When I write, I feel God's pleasure.
Wow. Wow, that's really nice. I could talk to you forever. And I've got 1,000 more questions. 1,000 more questions, but it's time to end this poetic journey. Wow.
Yes.
What can we find
Thank
the book?
you.
What can we find the book? Bold as if laden with snow. Where can we find it?
Yes, you can find it on Amazon if you just search the title. You can also find it on Bookshop, which supports small and independent bookstores across the United States. You can also find it at my website, which is just meganwildhood.com, and then the press, Cornerstone Press, which is run by students out of the University of Wisconsin at Stevens Point, also has it in their bookshop in the Legacy series. And so any of those places are great. And it came out May 16th. So it's available.
Hot off the presses.
Yeah.
Right. Writers and poets write for a myriad of reasons. Some write primarily to speak a message to their audience. Others write because staying silent is not an option, Megan. Why do you write? Why do you write?
Yes, I write because I would like others to feel seen the way books have made me feel seen.
Oh, all right. My very last question. Where do you go from here? What's next for you creatively?
So I have in draft form 2 novels, and then I just mapped out a third one today. I am also working on. I have finished a second full-length collection, and I'm working on a third, writing and editing the poems for that. And then I have a list of probably 12 to 13 short stories that I'm revising, and then 4 or 5 that I need to write.
I have thoroughly enjoyed listening to you. I really have. And I'm sure you're an excellent writing coach, too. You're great.
Thank you. I have too.
I also feature on this show writers of short stories. So if you'd like to come back and share some of your work, you're more than welcome to. More than welcome.
Oh, my God.
I'm serious.
I would love that. This has been such a pleasure, such a joy. I have just all of your questions have just really sharpened my even my understanding of my writing, my work thus far. So I really appreciate the opportunity to think more deeply about how I can serve my readers and just get even more clear on my mission and what my work really is about. I truly appreciate this so much. Thank you so much.
Yes, and I wish you nothing but the best.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much.
I'm serious. I don't tell it to everybody, but I wish you nothing but success. Oh, yes, I do. Yes, I do. Yes, I do. I don't want anybody mad at me. I wish it to everybody. But I wish you nothing but the best. I see your poetic star being on the rise. Whatever you attempt to do, I see it soaring. I really do. I mean, you just got that touch. So, thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yes,
so
thank you.
Oh.
Thank you
All right, here we go.
so much. Yes.
All right, as I share with you every time we're together, let poetry ring somewhere throughout the land. Good night, Megan.
Good night. Thank you so much.
Yes, all right. Bye.
Quintessential Listening, Poetry Online Radio, is available on iTunes, Spotify, SoundCloud, and Stitcher. You can also check out the website at qlpor.com.